Today we're running through the new Codex Space Marines for 9th edition 40K. It's an absolutely enormous book, and today we're going to skim through all the relevant rules changes and talk about which options are looking strong as we get underway with 9th edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So I'm very excited to be reviewing the new Codex Space Marines today. I've been a little bit wary of crafting too hard for my Space Marines in 9th edition, just seeing as I know that everything was going to change in this book. Overall, really quite a lot of things have changed. Tons of the datasheets have been rewritten, a lot of the Marines have got 2 wounds, half the stratagems have been changed, and Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Deathwatch and Space Wolves have all been folded to be subsidiaries of this book. Quite a seismic shift for Space Marines. There's a lot of scary stuff in here, but there's actually really quite a lot of nerfs that have toned the Space Marines down in various ways. In this video we're going to go through each section of the book and talk about the relevant changes and the things that I think might be strongest. So to start with, we have the contents. The book is absolutely massive at 208 pages long. There's an extensive lore and background section and miniature galleries. And there's also a hefty chunk of content for Crusade, which I'm going to be covering in a separate video at a later date. We'll be focusing on everything else today. We've got the core army and detachment rules, including some changes, updated chapter traits and successor chapter traits, almost 100 datasheets, including several new ones that we didn't know about, as well as rules for any of the new models that are coming out shortly. The Masters of the Chapter section, where you can pay points to upgrade characters to their heightened versions of themselves who command the chapter, such as the Chief Librarian. 34 stratagems that have been extensively reworked, though there are no chapter unique ones in here. Various character upgrades that generally have the same names to the Warlord Traits, Relics, Psychic Powers and Litanies, though a bunch of them have been tweaked in various ways. Some of them have been reworked, some of them have had the keywords changed, and a few have been buffed or nerfed. Largely though these sections are very similar, the Warlord Traits do have a chapter unique one in each, but the Relics, Psychic Powers and Litanies of Battle don't have any chapter unique content. I presume that they'll be coming in the supplements. There's also 3 unique secondary objectives, the Adeptus Astartes, and a decent points cost section, which has been done in an entirely new and much more simple style, where you basically just pay extra points for each individual weapon that you take on the unit without having to leaf through various sections of the book and add up the points cost of every single bit of war gear in the section. It honestly is a lot better and a lot more reliable than trying to do it the old way. The book will supersede the old Heroes of the Chapter rules in Faith and Fury, I believe, though currently all of the chapter-specific supplements, such as Salamanders, Imperial Fists and everything, still remain in use, as does the Black Templar section and the chapter-specific litanies from Faith and Fury. Dark Angels, Deathwatch and Space Wolves and Blood Angels are all pretty much in limbo. Their rules and codexes are significantly different to the ones in here, so honestly I'm not sure exactly what you do with those armies until their specific supplements come out. We do know that they'll all be out by January. So moving into the core content of the book, we have the core codex rules. All troops get objectives secured as previously. Chapter tactics get applied within detachments and only applied to non-servitors and non-beast units, so they will apply to your vehicles and dreadnoughts and everything. There's limits on the amount of captains and lieutenants that you can include in detachments, only 1 captain and 2 lieutenants per detachment, though if you upgrade a captain to a chapter master, you can have both a captain and a chapter master in the same detachment. The Angels of Death rule remains intact, with a couple of important changes and slight nerfs to the Marine Special rules. And They Shall Know No Fear has become significantly weaker. Space Marine units no longer get to reroll morale tests, so they are likely to fail a fair few more leadership tests, particularly if they're in big squads. It now only ignores penalties to combat attrition, so if you fail the test, 1 guy will run, and then you'll only ever lose any more Marines on the roll of a 1. Combat doctrines are unchanged from the previously. You cycle through from Devastator to Tactical to Heavy, but they have specified that Agents of the Imperium don't break doctrines if you include them in your army. Shock Assault is entirely unchanged. And Bolter Discipline has taken a slight nerf. It now only affects infantry, terminators and bikes. It doesn't affect dreadnoughts anymore, and it specifically doesn't affect centurions. They'll only be getting 6 shots at 24-inch range with their hurricane bolters. They also mention combat squads, the ability to break squads down into 2 equal halves, and a few of the ways to deploy Space Marines, such as teleporting in or jumping down from the skies, or outflanking where you turn up on the flanks of the army, much like Strategic Reserve. The chapter tactic list has been extensively rewritten. I have covered this in a couple of previous videos, so I won't go into it too far at the moment. Dark Angels I'd say is massively buffed. If their unit doesn't move within their own turn, then they get +1 to hit both in melee and at range. Very good, particularly for big gun vehicles that can't get all that many buffs anyway from the Codex now, as they're not core. Blood Angels is unchanged. Flesh Terrors now can stack with combat doctrines with the extra AP on wound rolls of 6. Space Wolves has changed to allow every single unit to heroically intervene 3 inches, as opposed to have characters intervene 6 inches, meaning that you really can't put any enemy units close to Space Wolves unless you want them to be in combat with them now. Deathwatch reroll hit rolls of 1 in melee against Xenos, and you select a battlefield roll for mission tactics, and you reroll wound rolls of 1 against them. There's no special issue ammunition weapons in this book, we'll have to wait for the Deathwatch Codex for them to appear. Ultramarines remain the same, White Scars remain the same as per the new updated ones from the 9th edition FAQ. They can advance and charge, fall back and charge, and also advance and shoot assault weapons at no penalty, which means they're really good for just pushing forward at the enemy. Raven Guard's been slightly nerfed, you get light cover on your units when they're 18 inches away from the enemy, and dense cover for infantry that are receiving the benefit of cover outside of 12 inches. They have to be slightly further away to get that bonus to their armor saves now. Iron Hands remains the same except they lost 5+ Overwatch. Salamanders got slightly nerfed as well, you only reroll 1 wound roll per attack, not both a hit roll and wound roll as previously. Imperial Fists only ignore lights cover, it is only 2 hits for bolt weapons on 6s, it's not 3 as some people were rumouring. Crimson Fist is tweaked to have +1 to hit on units of 5+, rather than models greater than the unit size, which in all honesty I think is a bit of a buff, and they also get the exploding 6s for bolt weapons. And Black Templars allow you to reroll advance and charge rolls, and have their 5+ feel no pain versus mortal wounds. You can't reroll any or all dice out of the charge rolls now though. I think the decision for which chapter tactics you take will really depend on their supplement codexes. There's certainly some small nerfs here, but I feel that Dark Angels have been drastically improved compared with their very weak one previously. And I'd argue that Space Wolves are perhaps a little bit improved as well, though they did have access to doing the same manoeuvre via a stratagem. If we look at Successor chapter tactics now, a fair few of these have changed as well. Bolter Fusiliers is the same and fairly decent for bolters, particularly bolt weapons on non-core units that can't get captain rerolls now. Born Heroes is +1 to hit on the charge now, it's actually a really decent melee buff that you could stack with Whirlwind of Rage. It's going to be very, very strong on any hard-hitting assault unit. Duelist remains the same, hit rolls of 6 auto wound against infantry and bikes. I don't think it's quite as good as some of the other melee ones. Fearsome Aspect is an aura of -1 leadership, which isn't great. Hungry for Battle is good for delivering melee with +1 to advance and charge, it's still a very strong one that. Indomitable is like Dark Angels to auto pass combat attrition now. Inheritors of the Primarch does include Space Wolves but not Deathwatch interestingly, so I guess that means it can be some sort of Space Wolves Successor chapter now. Knowledge is Power allows you to reroll Psychic and deny the Witch test results of 1. Long Range Marksman has been nerfed a little bit, it's only rapid fire and heavy weapons that are +3 inch range now, and not flamer weapons. Though to be honest, with flamers going to 12 inch range now, they've already been sorted to flame out of Deep Strike. Still a solid one for a shooty chapter I think. Master Artisans allows you to reroll a single hit roll per attack now, not a hit roll and wound roll. It's still a very solid increase in damage dealing, particularly for non-core units, multiple small units, but certainly a lot less of an auto-include than it was. Preferred Enemy allows you to reroll hit rolls of 1 against a specific faction that you must pick on your army list, still a bit random and non-specific for me. Rapid Assault allows you to advance and fire assault weapons with no modifier, fairly similar to White Scars, but to be honest I probably would just take White Scars if I was thinking about picking up that. Silence of the Forge is like past the Iron Hands, you double vehicle wounds on the results of vehicle damage tables. Stalwart gives you wound rolls of 1 or 2 always fail on your units, not the best defensive buff to be honest because the enemy has to be wounding on 2s for this to matter. Stealthy is nerfed, giving you greater than 18 inches away light cover, pretty much similar to the Raven Guard one this, still potentially useful as a big flat army buff, but not going to come into effect quite as often. Stoic is +1 leadership, probably still not worth taking, but more relevant now and They Shall Know No Fear has been nerfed. Tactical Withdrawal allows you to fall back and charge, and again I'd probably just want to pick White Scars over that. Warded gives you a 5+ feel no pain against mortal wounds, and Whirlwind of Rage allows a modifier of 6s in melee to score 1 additional hit. A very nice combat buff, could be really good to stack with Born Heroes. Overall I think that Successor chapters perhaps aren't quite as strong as they used to be. Master Artisans and Stealthy were both really strong options, and both of them are less desirable than previously. They're still both reasonable though, and you can make some interesting combat chapter combos in this, such as Born Heroes and Whirlwind of Rage, or maybe putting Hungry of Battle in for more reliable charges. I'd look at these if you really want the bits from the Codex supplement that you have, but you don't necessarily care too much about their chapter tactic. It's going to be interesting to see if Blood Angels or Dark Angels players do much with this list themselves. Next I thought we'd cover the chapter command, the points increases that you can give to various characters to make them better, and their abilities on the left. You can only have one of each of these per chapter, including any unique ones like Phyros, Master of the Forge, and if you do pay the points to include them, then you get the option to bring along an extra Warlord Trait and Relic, each of which is unique to that boosted character. First of all, we have the Chapter Master, who has been heavily nerfed, and now rather than his ability being an aura, you only can give it to one unit and in the command phase, which is a really big nerf. He's no longer the pinnacle of rerolls that he used to be. I'm honestly not convinced that he's worth taking at 40 points now. Might all just be better sticking with a cheaper captain, or going with any of the supplement unique Chapter Masters until they get nerfed as well, presumably. Gilliman, Calgar and Shrag are looking very good at the moment, at least until any changes come to their rules. Their unique Warlord trait is a command point farming one. Each command phase you roll a dice, on a 4+ you gain a command point. And they have some relic armour for a 2+ save, +1 to their wounds and +1 to their toughness, so it could really keep them safe there, particularly if they're on a bike or in Gravis armour or something, that would make them toughness 6. I think the command point Warlord trait farming one is quite interesting, it is very reliable. Next we have Master of Sanctity to allow a chaplain to know and recite one more litany than previously. I think it's a good deal for 25 points as it basically doubles the use of the chaplain, and they have a Warlord trait for +1 to cast their litany. And they can use the commanding oratory stratagem for 1 command point, which essentially allows you to auto-pass a litany, which I'm not sure you'd want to do if it was already boosted. Their relic is a little bit meh, it just prevents enemies using rerolls against the character and provides a leadership debuff. Next up we have the Master of the Forge for 20 points. He gives 3 wounds to be repaired on vehicles for a tech marine. The Warlord traits may be a little bit underwhelming. Dreadnoughts get +1 strength and +1 attack, and Dreadnoughts are core so they can use captain auras anyway. And the relic is an Omniscient Axe that gives +3 strength, AP -2 and damage 3. Vehicles suffer a mortal wound if they fail a save. I wouldn't necessarily bother with this as tech marines aren't all that fighty. Next up we have the Chief Librarian, who I'm a bit disappointed by. He's 25 points, and he can deny 1 more power, but he can't cast anymore, which is the real thing that I'd want him to do. He does unlock a Warlord trait for +1 to cast, and his relic is an extended Psychic Hood. I guess perhaps the Warlord trait could be worth it, but I can't see many people running him competitively. Next up we have the Chief Apothecary, and Apothecaries have seen a very big buff in this book. I was speculating that their Feel No Pain aura might go away, but it's actually become standard on all Apothecaries. They do cost a little bit more, but it really makes a ton of sense to have one if you've got one fighting alongside your gunline. His boosted option is to allow him to use combat restoratives twice, which just heals a model D3, which is a bit useless in himself, but the Warlord trait's quite good. He automatically heals 3 with combat restoratives, and he can also revive a model for 0 command points, and this can set up a model again at his full wounds profile, which can be used on something really massive such as an Outrider or an Invader ATV. They do have the bike keyword, and he can use it on bikes. This guy could be bringing back 8 wounds a model per turn if the stars align. In terms of his relic, he's got a relic pistol that's very good and damage 4 against infantry, though I don't think I'd pick it up myself. Next, the Chapter Ancient allows you to have one unit to be +1 to hit in melee within 6 inches, and you activate that in the command phase. Potentially useful and certainly adds a different buff, though you do need to be running him alongside combat units. His Warlord trait allows you to put Obsec on one unit nearby, and his relic buffs his Astartes banner ability in combat, allowing 2 attacks with a melee weapon rather than just 1. Again, I'm not necessarily sure about him for +20 points. It's not bad, but not absolutely outstanding. Finally, we have the Chapter Champion. He gets a bunch of buffs over the standard. Melee attacks will be -1 to hit him, he gets 5 attacks and leadership 9, and he rerolls wound rolls versus characters. His Warlord trait can allow him to reroll charge rolls for him and any core or character units within 6 inches, which is actually really quite a good one I think. Would certainly be good with supporting a melee battle line. And his relic is a very fighty sword, giving him strength +3, AP -3 and a flat damage of 3. Generally company champions don't tend to be taken all that much, but if you are bringing one along, then I think I would upgrade him to be a Chapter Champion. You do get a very significant amount of buffs on him. So next up we come to the massive amount of data sheets in this book. There's almost 100 here, and I'm going to skim through them, going over the important changes to the old ones, and of course any new ones. A bunch of chapters can't take certain units, Black Templars can't take Librarians, Dark Angels can't take Sternguard or Vanguard Vets, Deathwatch can't take Assault Squads, Devastators or Tactical Squads, nor Bite Squads, Attack Bite Squads, Scouts or Sternguard Veterans. They don't tend to go in for non-veteran Space Marines, and of course they'll have their own Deathwatch kill teams in place of Sternguard. Space Wolves can't take Apothecaries, they have Wolf Priests. They can't take Assault Squads, Devastators, Sternguard, Vanguard or Tactical Squads, as again they all have their own unique versions of those. However, these other chapters such as Dark Angels, Deathwatch and Space Wolves have gained a ton of units from this book. Most of them couldn't take things like Thunderfire Cannons, Centurions or some of the Flyers, and then it can now take any of them. They've also gained access to all the Warlord Traits, Relics, Psychic Powers and Master of the Chapter from Codex Space Marines, where they didn't have access to any of these before. This alone is going to be a massive power boost to the various other special Snowflake chapters. Deathwatch in particular have gone from just being a few units of an army to a massive full Space Marine force. As I said, with these datasheets, points costs have been significantly redone and they're a lot nicer to look at now. For example, if you look at this one on the right for the Assault Intercessor Squad, it tells you the unit size, how much the cost is per model, and then it lists any war gear that costs points below that, so if you take any of that gear, then it will cost additional points. And you know that everything else on the model is free, you don't have to go hunting through the tables to track it down. That means I know that if I'm taking a 5-man squad of Assault Intercessors, I take a Plasma Pistol and a Thunder Hammer on the Sergeant, then that's going to cost me 120 points, and it's really easy to work out. Finally, one very big change on the datasheet is the addition of the core keyword. Many character auras, psychic powers, relics and warlord traits only affect core units now, and in general it's been applied fairly liberally. Basically, pretty much every infantry squad aside from Centurions has gained core, including very hard-hitting ones such as Eliminators, Eradicators and Hellblasters for example. Most of the bikes have standard bikes and attack bikes, though not the Invader ATV, and interestingly and powerfully all Dreadnoughts have, so they'll still be getting character auras. That could be really quite a key thing if the Forge World Dreadnoughts still retain core, we'll have to see. Centurions don't, where Aggressors and Terminators do, which I think is going to make them less taken relatively. So let's start with the HQ choices then. Captain and Lieutenant auras only affect core units now. Captain's at 85 points base, and their Relic Blade is buffed in Strength, Strength +3, AP -3 and flat damage 2 for just 10 points, so it seems like a really good choice now. It's really not all that far off the Burning Blade. There's various war gear datasheets in here where you can take things for specific chapters. For example, a Deathwatch Captain can take a Xenophase Blade if he wants to. On the Primaris Captain's datasheet, he can now take the Indomitus option as a unique loadout. He can't mix and match Storm Shields and Relic Power Swords unfortunately, and he'll still cost you 105 points. There's a new Gravis Captain, this chap with the Mastercrafted Heavy Bolt Rifle that you can see on the right. He's basically the same profile as the other Gravis Captain. He's 7 wounds at toughness 5 with a 4+ invult, so isn't going anywhere fast. And that Mastercrafted Heavy Bolt Rifle is pretty much as you'd expect, 36-inch range, Strength 5, AP -1 and Damage 2, Rapid Fire, so you can put down a decent amount of hurt at range, and he also does have a Mastercrafted Power Sword. Frankly, he'll do far more damage in melee than he will at range, despite being the focus of the model that he's got that massive gun. Not a bad option if you want a captain that's just a bit tankier, and you don't mind passing up something like a Power Fist. For the Lieutenants, they've split up Reaver Lieutenants and Phobos Lieutenants into 2 separate entities. The Reaver one is 75 and the Phobos one is 80 points, and it just makes things a bit clearer as to their war gear and special rules. Space Wolf Lieutenants get the Wolf Guard keyword, and a lot of HQs benefit from the various new rules for the close combat weapons, such as Power Swords being +1 strength now, Axes being +2 strength, Morse +3. Power Fists and Boltstorm Gauntlets are now flat damage 2 now, and Thunder Hammers have been nerfed slightly. They're still damage 3 and only AP -2 now, but they only cost 20 points on captains, so it's a lot cheaper to field them. Frankly, I think they are going to outcompete Power Fists again when you're taking them on Smash Captains. The cheapest Librarians you can get are 90 points. They get the Deathwing keyword, and they've had a very improved Psychic power on the core book, which we'll come on to. Psychic Fortress is excellent and can give you a 5+ invul save. Chaplains have had their litanies changed to do them in the command phase now, which has its positives and negatives. Perhaps a bit easier to remember, but you might not be able to deploy any defensive litanies before your opponent starts shooting. Most of the litanies are restricted to core or character units now, so you can't use them on big things like Repulsor Executioners. Space Wolves will get the Wolf Priest keyword on these. The Crozius Arcanum has been buffed slightly, it's Strength +2, so Chaplains are typically Strength 6. And we've got the new option for the Primaris Chaplain on bike, who's 115 points, so 35 more than a regular Chaplain on foot. I'll be doing a video on him in the near future. He's 14-inch movement, Weapon Skill 2+, Ballistic Skill 3+, Strength 4, Toughness 5, a mighty 7 wounds, 4 attacks, Leadership 9 and a 3+ save. He also is protected by that Rosarius. He looks like a very decent fighty character to ride alongside some Outriders, maybe supported by a regular captain on a bike. Tech Marines have also seen a very extensive rework, though they do cost significantly more at 70 points now. Their Omniscient Axe is a little bit better, it's Strength +2, AP -2 and flat damage 2. They still heal vehicles just the same, but they've gained an absolutely awesome special rule called Awaken Machine Spirits, which gives you +1 to hit for one vehicle within 3 inches. You can only select one and it's done in the command phase. This gives you incentives to just take 1 or 2 really big tanks, allowing your Tech Marine to give you a massive amount of ballistic skill shooting on that one. There's a nice shiny new Primaris Tech Marine about as well. He only costs 80 points, so it's actually really quite a good upgrade in my opinion compared with the base. He's movement 6, Weapon Skill 3+, Ballistic Skill 2+, Strength and Toughness 4, 5 wounds, 4 attacks, Leadership 8 and a 2+ save. He has a backpack mounted Forge Bolter, which is an Assault 3 heavy bolter essentially, and he can fire it in addition to firing his pistol as well, which has a grav pistol which is 12-inch range, strength 5, AP -3 and damage 1, or flat 2 versus 3+ save. Incidentally, that is how all grav weapons work now. They go to flat 2 damage when you're targeting 3+ save units. He also attacks with Mechadendrites, where he gets 2 additional attacks at strength 5 with no AP. Honestly, just for that heavy bolter alone, I'd typically take the Primaris Tech Marine myself. Next up we come to the troops choices, and there's one very notable omission that scouts have now moved to the elite's choice after all. I honestly didn't think that they were going to, but it seems that they will. I think they're going to be a little bit more niche now, but having a throwaway screening unit could still be useful. As with all the standard size Space Marines, Tactical Marines have gone to 2 wounds now, at 18 points, so we're going to be more durable but less fighty than Intercessors, who get an additional attack and better bolters compared with the Tactical Squad. Assault Intercessors have an expanded plethora of options. They can take Thunderhammers, Power Fists or Power Swords on the Sergeant, or Hand Flamers or Plasma Pistols too. They're still 19 points, and with those AP -1 Astartes Chainswords, I think they're going to be taken quite a lot more regularly now they can take Thunderhammers. Intercessors remain 20 points, still very solid. Incursors remain 21 points, and they've had a couple of tweaks. Their paired combat blades give them AP -1, but you don't get exploding hits on 6s anymore. So they're going to be a little bit better against armoured targets, but are a little bit worse against things like hordes. Their Haywire Mine has also changed. You no longer plant it, but enemies suffer a D3 mortal wounds on a 2+ when their opponent charges them. If a vehicle charges them, then that's increased to 3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 2+. I think it's still a pretty reasonable option for 10 points. Next, the Infiltrators remain at 24 points, and their Helix Adept has slightly changed. He doesn't heal them anymore, but you ignore the first failsave on the unit per turn, so we will save a bit of damage coming in on the squad. Heavy Intercessors are some of the new big bad boys of the troops choice. We can see their datasheet on the right here. They're essentially a Gravis profile with Strength and Toughness 5, Movement 5, 3 wounds, 2 attacks, Leadership 7 and a 3+ save, and they're really quite a cheap 28 points per model, which I think will have them competing with standard Intercessors very nicely. They essentially have the same bolt rifles as Intercessors, except they're all Strength 5 and 6-inch longer range. Though in general, unless you're firing against Toughness 5 or 4 units, then the Intercessors are going to be doing just as much, if not more damage. One model in every 5 can take one of their 3 unique heavy bolters, either a standard one, a Hellstorm one, or an Executioner one. The Hellstorm is shorter ranged and less AP but more shots. The Executioner one is 2 shots and 42-inch range but damage 3. There aren't any melee options on the Sergeant, so close combat is going to be a weakness for them. They have far lower damage output than standard Intercessors in the fight phase, but I think they will be a really annoying unit to shift when they're standing at the back holding objectives. I honestly think that these guys are going to be very competitive. Next up we have the Elite's choices. Scouts are remaining at 14 points, and their camo cloaks are +2. Unlike the rest of the Space Marines, they remain at just 1 wound. They're definitely going to be taken less now they're no longer troops. Company Champions are 55 points now. Their combat shield gives them +1 to their saving throw, so they'll have a 2+ save at standard. And their Mastercrafted Power Sword has gained +1 strength, so it's going to be significantly more dangerous against most targets. The Champion, Apothecary and Ancient all have the Command Squad special rule, which means that they can be included without taking up a detachment slot if there's a Company Veteran Squad in the same detachment. Though the Company Champion has lost his innate rerolls against characters, he'll now only get that if he's a Chapter Champion. Honestly, he's not too bad as a melee bruiser, but I'm not sure he compares amazingly well with taking his equivalent points in Blade Guard Veterans, for example. Ancients have received a bit of a buff to their banner ability. They're still 75 points as the base model, and the aura only affects core units, so no Centurions or anything, but it does apply to the entire unit when that unit is within 6 inches range now. It's not just the individual models that can fire when they die, it's every model in the unit. That will really allow you to spread out quite a lot more. I would say that the biggest winner out of this section though is the Apothecary. He's up at 75 points, but as I mentioned previously, he now has the Feel No Pain aura baked in, so any units within 3 inches of him will have a 6+ Feel No Pain type save. Thankfully though, this is no longer increased to 5+ when fielded on Iron Hands, which does make them a little bit less obnoxious. This guy's going to be really potent with any of the 2 wound Space Marine variants. He's going to make them a lot more survivable. In terms of his healing abilities, he can now only heal each model D3 wounds per turn. If he wants to actually get models back up and stand them back up again, it's a 1 command point stratagem, but the model does come back at 4 wounds. As he can do this on infantry and bikes, he can do this on Outriders or Invader ATVs or even Centurions, so he can very easily buy back very expensive models for 1 command point per. I think that Apothecaries are going to be taken more than they were before. They seem very strong. Finally, Company Veterans to round up the command squad are now 20 points now. They're still very flexible in terms of war gear. Next up we have a whole brand new datasheet for the Codex in Veteran Intercessors. Before you took standard intercessors and used command points to make them veterans, now you can just buy them as veterans for 22 points per model. For me, if you do want standard intercessors that are just a little bit more fighty damage dealers, then these seem to be a bit of a steal. What I particularly like is that you can either use them as the bolt rifle variant, or you can basically run them as assault intercessors, so you can have Astartes chainswords on the go, which will give you a whopping 5 attacks at AP-1 on the charge. Having a sergeant with 4 attacks is really pretty excellent for any Thunderhammers or Power Fists that you put on the unit as well. In general, they seem very, very solid to me, and I think they'd be a really quite solid choice for putting it in an Impulsor. With that many chainsword attacks plus a Thunderhammer or Power Fist, you're really going to be putting a lot of hurt in one little box. For the other premier Impulsor option, we have the Blade Guard Veterans. They remain 35 points, and they gain either Deathwing or Wolfguard, depending on whether they're in Dark Angels or Space Wolves. You can take squads of 3 to 6 of them. I suspect a lot of people will run them in 5s to avoid blast weapon and coherency special rules, and honestly they're looking like a very scary little countercharge units. I think people will be taking them in 5s to bully the midfield. They don't really have all that much in terms of way of war gear options, and the only options that you have are that the sergeants can take a Neo-Volkite pistol or a plasma pistol, both of which aren't terrible but aren't really significant upgrades on the bolt pistol in my opinion. It really is melee what you're going to bring them for. In terms of normal size veterans, we have Vanguard and Sternguard veterans. They're both 2 wounds now. Vanguard vets are 19 points or 21 points if you take a jump pack, which I think that most people would. I think the Vanguard veterans are going to be a very solid unit again now. Their Astartes chainswords are going to be very good for an extra bit of AP, and the Storm Shields are going to be far more valuable when they're protecting 2 wound models. Storm Shields are 4 points now, so for just 25 points per, you could be putting down a unit with 2 wounds each and a 4+ invul save and a 2+ save. They also do have relatively cheap power weapons for some reason comparatively. Thunderhammers are just 12 points on these, and Power Fists are only 8. They're honestly looking very nasty in my opinion. Sternguard veterans are far tougher than they were. They're 2 wounds as well, 20 points, and their special issue bolter is 30 inch, has rapid fire, strength 4, AP-2 and damage 1. Though I believe that they've lost the +1 to wound stratagem from the stratagems, meaning that they're very similar to a standard intercessor squad now, with a few heavy options that you can throw into the squad if you want to. The Judiciar has received a bit of a nerf in this book. His Tempora Mortis ability to slow enemy units and make them fight last is now only 3-inch range rather than 6-inch range, meaning that you're not going to be able to use it to protect your own units nearby to him for the most part. Most of the time he is going to need to be in close combat himself. Still very useful, but definitely less useful than he was when he could fit an entire squad in that 6-inch bubble range and guarantee that your opponents are fighting last if they charge you. Next up, Reavers unfortunately remain a bit rubbish. They're 18 points at standard, or 20 points with their grav shoots or grapple hooks. The only buff that they get is that they, for some reason, have special issue bolt pistols rather than heavy bolt pistols, which are strength 4, AP-2 and damage 1. Aggressors have taken a massive nerf. They're still 40 points for Flamestorms or 45 for Auto Bolt Storms, but they lost their double shoot if stationary ability. The amount of shooting that you get is just what you get now, and all the various tricks to count them as stationary to get double shooting such as Ultramarines aren't really going to help you. Still, I don't think that they're bad, but they're just not looking quite as nice compared with say Terminators now, weirdly enough. They still will have slightly better shooting, but maybe not quite as good durability. Talking of which, Terminators are looking very scary. They're 3 wounds each, and they still cost less than 40 points with a Power Fist and Stormbolter. Power Fist and Chain Fists can be freely mixed and swapped, they don't cost any more points. Chain Fists are AP-4 and damage D3, and Power Fists are AP-3, damage 2, so have a bit more reliability but less AP. Assault Terminators are 33 points with Lightning Claws, and it appears that each Lightning Claw gives you an additional attack with the Lightning Claw, so they're a little bit more fighty than they were. They still remain 43 points with the Thunderhammer and Storm Shield, and with the additional survivability of 3 wounds, I think the Terminators are going to make a massive comeback. They're genuinely looking incredibly nasty. In the standard Terminator squad, the Heavy Flamer might make a bit of a comeback, now it's 12-inch range and can actually fire out of Deep Strike. They've weirdly combined the Cataphractii and Tartarus Terminator squads. They're now just listed under Relic Terminator squads, and are 39 points when armed with a Power Fist or Chain Fist. They still have all the war gear options they had before, but they've lost their unique flavour. You don't get the 4+ for Cataphractii, and you don't get the extra movement for Tartarus anymore. They all just have the exact same profile as standard Terminators. A bit sad really, as they had their own unique quirks before. Assault Centurions are 55 points, or 70 points with Hurricane Bolters, though they won't be firing them quite as rapidly anymore, seeing as they lost Bolter Discipline. They will be able to do a bit more damage out of Deep Strike though if you're Raven Guard or something, as they can use their 12-inch flamers now, and they're still 4 wounds and 3 attacks, so they still pack a very decent punch in melee. They don't have the reroll auras as we mentioned though, so that will nerf them somewhat. The Invicta Tactical Warsuit is actually very slightly down in points at 160. It still has concealed positions for setting up right next to the enemy. Largely its rules are pretty much unchanged. It did lose its heavy sidearm ability for the bolter that it has strapped to its waist. That just counts as a standard heavy bolter now in all respects. It is 3 shots, not just 1 shot, and its twin Iron Hail heavy stub is a heavy 8 now, rather than heavy 6. Overall, a small buff to the Invicta. Possibly some of the biggest winners for the entire book, though, are Dreadnoughts. Dreadnoughts have gone absolutely through the roof in power level, in my opinion, as they've gained Duty Eternal being activated all the time. Duty Eternal was a stratagem that gave them -1 damage when enemies targeted them. It was a stratagem that was well worth using, and now they just get it literally all the time. I'm honestly not sure why they did this. Most of the Dreadnoughts don't seem to have gone up in points too much whatsoever. And on top of this, Dreadnoughts are all core units as well, so you can still use Captain and Lieutenant rerolls to give them murderously decent damage output. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more Dreadnoughts going forward, and I really hope they manage to balance the Forge World variants right, because frankly they're already very, very strong, and gaining Duty Eternal all the time is really not something that they properly need. A standard Dreadnought will now cost you 120 points including War Gear. If you want to upgrade to a multi-melter, then it's plus 5 points, and I think that this will be quite a tempting option now. Dreadnought close combat weapons are now flat 3 damage across the board. Venerable Dreadnoughts are 135 points, and in general I'd say that they're a better deal than the standard Dreadnought myself. The Games Workshop pattern contempt to Dreadnought is now 150 points, though it has dropped to 9 wounds rather than 10. The multi-melter that it's armed with is now far more relevant, and it retains its movement 8 and 5+ Invul save. The Ironclad Dreadnought is a bit more tempting as well. Chain Fister AP -4 and damage 2d3, or a flat damage 6 against vehicles. You do not want to get in combat with this thing if you happen to be a vehicle. Hunter-killer missiles have been slightly buffed, as mentioned by Games Workshop's Warhammer community in the past. They're 5 points per now, and strength 10, AP -2, d6 damage. Finally, the biggest Dreadnought in the book is the Redemptor. He's 175 points base. His Onslaught Gatling Cannon has been buffed to heavy 8, and the Heavy Onslaught has been buffed to heavy 12, strength 6. The Redemptor Fist is even more powerful than before, with damage d3 plus 3, so an average of 5. And the Macroplasma Incinerator has got even stronger. It's now heavy d6, strength 8, damage 2 when not overcharged. So that's going to be going through Space Marines like nobody's business, and if you do overcharge, then it goes to strength 9, AP -4, damage 3. Honestly, I think we're going to be seeing loads more Dreadnoughts on the table. In particular, that Redemptor looks very, very scary now. Moving on to the fast attack choices, we have Assault Squads up at 2 wounds as well, again at 18 points or 20 points with the jump pack. Unfortunately, I still don't really see a reason to take them when you can take Vanguard Vets, though Astartes Chainswords would help you a bit if you are wanting to field them. Bike Squads are 30 points and give you 3 wound bikes now, and for Space Wolves they give you the Swift Claw keyword, and it doesn't give you any negative to hit anymore, which is quite nice. I think with the extra speed and that increased durability, bikes are going to be really quite an interesting choice. Scout bikes, on the other hand, I think aren't looking quite as good. They're still only 2 wounds now, and they're 30 points as well. They do deal a little bit more damage than the standard bike squads with their options such as shotguns and things, and they can outflank, popping up on the enemy's edges, though I think out of the 2 the bike squad just makes more sense just because of how much more durable they are. Outriders remain exactly the same points cost. They still have that +2 attacks on the charge special rule, but they're only units of 3. Unfortunately, you can't fill them in big units of 6 or something, which would have been quite nice for Dark Angels or Ravenwing players. It's going to be interesting to re-evaluate the difference between Outriders and Bikes now that they have the increased wounds, seeing which one is better. Next we have the Invader ATV. He's a 14-inch move buggy with Weapon Skill 3 and Ballistic Skill 3, Strength 4, Toughness 5, 8 wounds, 4 attacks, Leadership 7 and a 3+ save, and you can get squads of 1 to 3 of them. They're 80 points with the Onslaught Gatling Cannon, which is now up to 8 shots, or 85 with the multi-melter, and they both pack the twin auto bolt rifles for an additional 6 shots at 24-inch range. These things really do look quite problematic to deal with. They pack quite a lot of firepower, are very fast and fairly tough point for point, all of which are good things. I think both options are viable, depending on whether you need more anti-tank or anti-infantry in your army. They'll have very good synergy with the Ravenwing in Dark Angels and White Scars with their bike tricks, and as we mentioned, they can be very helpful with the Apothecary as well, who can heal ones that get injured and also restore one with 4 wounds for 1 command point. Finally, attack bikes are 45 points with a heavy bolter or 55 with a multi-melter, and frankly they're looking very good as well. They're nowhere near as tough as the ATV point for point, but you can put out a very frightening amount of melter shots on a fast moving platform, plus you get the bolter damage too. Now we have 2-shot multi-melters. I think that attack bikes might have a place in competitive lists. Next we have Suppressors, which are 100 points for a unit of 3, you can't take any more still, and their accelerator autocannons have been changed a bit. They're now only AP -1, but they are 3 shots per guy. Like most other infantry, they do have the core keyword, and for their denying Overwatch special rule, you only need to hit an infantry target to deny the Overwatch, you don't need to kill anyone. Overall, it's a very decent buff to their damage output, and again they're stronger than previously. Inceptors remain very good, 40 points with the bolters or 45 points with the plasma exterminators, and like all plasma weapons in this book, those plasma exterminators will only overcharge on an unmodified one now, which means that you can advance them a little bit easier if you want to. If we look at the Storm Speeders, they have movement 16, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3+, strength 5, toughness 6, 10 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 7 and a 3+ save. There are 3 variants in the Hail Strike for 150, the Hammer Strike for 170, and the Thunder Strike for 175. The Hail Strike is the anti-infantry version with an Onslaught Gatling Cannon, a twin Iron Hail Heavy Stubber for 8 shots, and 2 Fragstorm Grenade Launchers. It will put out around about 23 shots on average, though not massively strong ones to be fair. The Hammer Strike is 170 points, the war gear is the ones that you see in the picture. It's got a Hammer Strike missile launcher with 36-inch range, heavy 2, strength 8, AP-3 and a flat damage 3, 2 fairly incidental Crackstorm grenade launchers, and a big melter destroyer at the front, which is essentially a 3-shot multi-melter. Finally, the Thunder Strike has a twin Icarus rocket pod. Icarus rocket pods have been changed slightly to just have +1 to hit aircraft, and they don't have any penalty for shooting at ground anymore, though no bonus for shooting at non-aircraft that fly. He's got a slightly upgraded Last Talon, which is a Thunder Strike Last Talon. It's 36-inch range, heavy 2, strength 9, AP-3 and damage D6, and a Storm Strike missile launcher, which is 48 inches, heavy 1, strength 10, AP-3 and damage D6. This guy might not have quite the same damage output as the Hammer Strike, but he's a bit happier staying at longer range, so that is a positive. Overall, I think they're fairly reasonably pointed. They really aren't all that tough for the amount of points that you sink into them, and I'm not sure we're going to see them taken all that much competitively, though they do look like fun models to use, and they do hit very, very hard. Landspeeders are going to have more relevance with the multi-melter. You can get a Landspeeder with a multi-melter for 70 points, though they will be competing against things like attack bikes, where you do get a fair bit more damage output per point. All the Landspeeders have the Data Link Telemetry special rule, which means you can select one unit within 18 inches of them, and Whirlwinds get +1 to hit that unit. The Landspeeder datasheet has been weirdly broken up into 3 different types, as the standard Landspeeder, the Landspeeder Tornado, which is the one where you can take an assault cannon or a heavy flamer as an underslung weapon, or the Landspeeder Typhoon, which is 110 points. That's the one that comes with the Typhoon missile launcher and either a heavy bolter or multi-melter. For me, it's the bikes, suppressors and inceptors that are winning the fast attack choice at the moment, probably more than the Landspeeders and Storm Speeders. Next up we come to the heavy support. Hellblasters are 33 points, and their heavy and assault versions have been buffed. The heavy variant is now strength 8 damage 2 base to damage strength 9 and damage 3 overcharging. The assault variant is stronger as well. It gets 3 shots now at strength 6 AP-4 damage 1 and also can overcharge. For me, the assault version is probably the way to go now, though you do have a slightly worse chance of killing yourself if you are overcharging. Eliminators remain at 30 points with their bolt snipers, and las fusils are +10 per model. Unfortunately, they've received really quite a big nerf in losing guided aim, the one where their sergeant Spolgos is shooting to give them +1 to hit and wound, and they're just not quite as strong as a result. The Instigator Bolt Carbine now gives them a covering fire special rule, which now allows the squad to move after shooting, so they can kind of jump, shoot, jump, move out, shoot their weapons, and then jump back out of line of sight if the terrain permits. Centurion Devastators are 85 points with grav cannons or heavy bolters, or 90 points with the las cannons, a little bit down in points cost from before, perhaps partly reflecting the way that you can't just soup them up with a huge amount of auras as you could previously. They did also lose the ability to fire their Hurricane bolters at 24-inch range for 12 shots, which is quite a major nerf as well. I still think that they can be fairly decent damage dealing output, though they aren't all that tough point for point. Next, of course, we have the true bogeymen of the book, the Eradicators, who remain at 40 points and are just as strong, if not stronger than before. Eradicators remain at 40 points per model. They have their standard melter rifles as we've seen previously, Assault 1 24-inch range melter weapons, and if you fire the entire unit at one enemy unit, then they all get to shoot twice. They're some of the best damage dealing in all of 40k at the moment, while still being quite tough. They now also have the option to take heavy melter rifles, which are an extra 5 points over the standard. They're heavy 1, so won't be moving quite as well, but at base they do d6 plus 2 damage, which increases to d6 plus 4 if they're within melter range. For me, I'm not necessarily sure that they're a worthwhile investment over the standard ones. They will definitely be better against vehicles, but you're pretty strong against vehicles anyway, and I think I'd rather have the extra movement that the standard melter rifles have. You can now take them in squads of 3 to 6, though I think the minimum squads is probably more sensible, as it means you have less chance of just overkilling a unit. And one model out of every 3 can now take a multi-melter as well, which is potentially a bit more of a strong choice, particularly as they can fire it twice. They do have the core keyword, so any auras and synergies that they had before are pretty much the same now. I think it's very safe to say that Eradicators are going to crop up in the competitive games for a long time to come. Moving on, Devastators got 2 wounds and are at 18 points, the same as Tactical Marines, which I think makes them very interesting, and just a lot more of a safe platform to put heavy weapons on than they were before. Grav Cannons remain 10 points, but they don't have the Gravitic Amplification stratagem anymore, which made them really efficient, so maybe we'll see a few more of the other weapons, perhaps multi-melters on them. I wouldn't be surprised to see some multi-melter drop pods coming down in 9th. The Thunderfire Cannon is a little bit cheaper, but it's received a pretty powerful nerf. It's only Strength 4 and AP 0 now, not Strength 5 AP -1. It also isn't core, so it doesn't benefit from any character auras. Its best use is probably just literally being included for tremor shells and dealing with a few light infantry. The Fire Strike Servo Turret is either 90 points with the Twin Accelerator Autocannon, which is Heavy 6, Strength 7 AP -1 and Damage 2, or 130 points with the Twin Las Cannon, which is only 24 inches, Heavy 4, Strength 9, AP -3 and Damage D6. It can indeed hover around at 3 inches with no penalty to its shooting. It is a vehicle, and I'd say it's moderately survivable. It's got Toughness 5 and a 2+ save, but only 5 wounds. In general, reasonable damage output with the Tech Marine hitting on 2s, but not all that hard to deal with for the opponent on a points per points basis. You can field them in squads of 1 to 3, so you could really have quite a lot of gun turrets going on if you wanted them. Hunters and Stalkers have both seen some changes. Hunters are 110 points, and the Hunter Killer Missile is an extra 5. They're now very much a dedicated anti-air choice. They don't have the full rerolls to hit for their missile, but they get +2 to hit against aircraft, and if they shoot at an aircraft the damage becomes D6 +6, which is very funny. Honestly, I don't expect to see them taking quite so much. They're just not good enough against the field, and I'd rather take other options. Stalkers are 115 points, and their special rule now gives them double the amount of shots against aircraft and +1 to hit against them, though they no longer have any -1 to hit against ground targets. Out of the two, I much prefer the Stalker now. Unfortunately though, both of these guys did lose their Skyfire stratagem, which was a significant buff in the last codex. Whirlwinds are still a bit pricey at the moment, 125 points or 135 with Vengeance. I'm not sure they're going to be taken very much. And Predator tanks have been split into 2 different datasheets. The Predator Annihilator starts at 130 points, and the Predator Destructor with the autocannon starts at 140. I'm not 100% sure why they split the datasheet in 2, but one of the upshots is that you can have 6 of these Predators in the same list if you really want to. They seem fairly well balanced in terms of damage output per point, not quite as strong as things with multi-melters at the moment though I think. Next we come to the Primaris Gladiator tanks, which I did do a full separate review video on very recently, so feel free to check that out if you'd like to see more. They're a good generalist Space Marine battle tank though. They've got a 10-inch move, weapon skill 6, ballistic skill 3, strength 7, toughness 8, 12 wounds, 3 attacks and leadership 8. All of them can take an Icarus rocket pod, an Iron Hail stubber and an auto launchers to allow them to have smoke screens on for an extra 5 points each, and they seem like pretty reasonable upgrades to their firepower to me. They have 3 variants on 3 different datasheets. The Lancer is 200 points, it's armed with a laser destroyer and 2 storm bolters. The laser destroyer is heavy 2, 72 inches, strength 10, AP -3 and damage D3 +3, and it hits on 2s with its Aquilon optics. Honestly, despite the impressive stats though, it really doesn't do all that much for a 200 point model. I wouldn't take this one. The Reaper has a twin heavy onslaught Gatling cannon, which is a slightly hilarious 30-inch range, heavy 24 shot, strength 6 AP -1 gun, so it's going to be excellent at shredding hordes. It also supplements that with 2 Tempest bolters, which are rapid fire 4, strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1. That's potentially a pretty crazy 40 shots with this thing within 15-inch range. Not bad, seems pretty respectable for the 230 points that you pay. Finally, we have the most pricey variant in the Valiant, which is 250. You have a twin Las Talon, which is 24 inches, heavy 4, strength 9, AP -3, damage D6. And it also has 2 multi-melters on the sponsons, so you're getting 8 heavy anti-tank shots at 24-inch range. Very expensive, but also fairly durable, and this thing will leave a really big mark against enemy vehicles. The Vindicator's had a bit of a tweak on its siege shield. It costs an extra 10 points now, but it gives you +1 to its saves versus ranged attacks, so essentially a 2+ save Vindicator, which is really quite good in my books. The Land Raiders are all 285 points now, and they don't have any of the Vengeance of the Machine Spirit stratagem to auto-explode them when they die, which makes me sad. Power of the Machine Spirit is also a stratagem now. It basically allows them to fight on top profile. Repulsors have become a heavy support choice rather than a transport. They're 315 point base, and they have a Hunter Slayer missile baked in, which is a single shot strength 10 Hunter Killer missile that can fire out of line of sight. The Repulsor Executioner is 355 points, its Macroplasma Incinerator has been buffed a bit. It's just the same as the Dreadnought, strength 9 and flat damage 3 when overcharging, sorry not d6 there, that was a typo. And the Heavy Laser Destroyer is upgunned a bit, strength 12, AP 4 and damage d3 plus 3. However, I think that the Repulsor Executioner has taken a heavy nerf. You can no longer fire the turret twice if it moves slowly, and it can't benefit from character auras, so overall its firepower is just going to be a ton worse. Next we have dedicated transports. Transports aren't core units, and they've received a fair few different changes. Drop pods you can put your whole army in reserve, but they now cost 70 points, and Deathwind missile launchers don't cost any extra. Rhinos no longer have their fairly trivial auto-repair role where they hold a wound on 6s. Razorbacks remain pretty much the same, maybe a bit more use with those heavy bolters now. And Impulsors have seen a fair few changes, they're now 110 points base, so a bit cheaper. The Shield Dome is only 15 points, but only gives you a 5+ invul, no longer the very nice 4+ invul that they had. All its heavy stubbers are heavy 4 now, so they're a better choice than previously in my opinion, and the Icarus version doesn't have any penalty for shooting against ground targets anymore. All the grav tanks, the Repulsor and the Impulsor, lost the -2 to charges that they had. This is now a stratagem called Grav Wave, which you can choose to deploy when an enemy charges you, and as part of the same stratagem you can also fall back and shoot if needed. Impulsors and Repulsors also lost the fly keyword, so they're going to have to go around terrain rather than straight over it. I don't think many people will be fielding Repulsors anymore, but I think that Impulsors are still very good for transporting infantry to the front. Finally, Landspeeder Storms gained the Assault Vehicle special rule. This one's the one that's the same as the Impulsor, where the unit can get out and shoot even after the transport has moved. Maybe not the most meaningful ever, seeing as scouts can shoot from inside it still, but I guess it's a nice little option, and incidental little cheap transport vehicles are quite good in 9th for snagging objectives. The Space Marine Flyers didn't see all that many changes, other than Blood Angels, Dark Angels and Space Wolves can get access to all of them now. Probably the biggest change is to the Stormhawk Intercessor, which now had a nerf to its Infernum Halo launcher. It's only +1 to its saving throw against aircraft, not all fly units. The Stormhawk and the Storm Talon also lost their +1 to hit against fly and ground targets respectively, which again kind of makes sense as they now no longer suffer the penalty for moving and shooting with heavy weapons. In terms of the fortification in the book, the Hammerfall Bunker, we now know his full stat line. He's 175 points, ballistic skill 4+, strength and toughness 8, 14 wounds, leadership 7, and a 3+ save, and does degrade. That's quite punishing, as when he's 7 wounds or less he really won't be hitting all that accurately. He's got the very big missiles that you can see at the bottom, the Super Frag and Super Crack missiles. Super Cracks are heavy 2, strength 10, AP -2, and damage d6, so hopefully she'll get 1 hit per turn on an enemy unit. The most interesting thing about this model is its Heavy Bolter and Heavy Flamer array, which have a very weird profile indeed. You basically get the profile for just 1 Heavy Bolter or 1 Heavy Flamer, but it attacks every single eligible target in range. I think that this is quite good for the Heavy Bolter, as if you manage to put down this thing with range on a lot of enemy units, you'll essentially get a free Heavy Bolter shot at every single one of them. It depends how many individual units your opponent has in their army as to whether or not this thing is going to be good or not. It does sound pretty amazing, but bear in mind that you're only getting 1 Heavy Bolter profile hitting on 4s against each target, which isn't the most overwhelming thing in the world. Its explosion is d6 mortal wounds, so you don't want to be keeping your units too close to it for the most part. And perhaps the most surprising thing for me is that the Hammerfall Bunker cannot deep strike. It doesn't have any special rules to allow it to do so. I honestly thought that was going to be the point of this thing, to deep strike along drop pods, but it seems not to be the case. That really makes it not so good for me. You'll have to set it up in your own deployment zone, and there might not be very many good places to put that, particularly if you're playing on a terrain-dense board. So there we have our summary of the datasheets. Let's move on to the stratagems for Codex Space Marines now. They've split them up into various different categories, and they have lost quite a few stratagems and added a whole bunch of new ones. Some of the notable ones that have disappeared are Gravitic Amplification, which is really going to make grav cannons not so near a good a choice as a result. Vengeance of the Machine Spirit, which I really liked to either shoot or auto-explode with a vehicle. Target Sighted, to allow you to snipe with Stalker Bolt Rifles and just gun down a character. Skyfire for the Hunter and Stalker. The Veteran Intercessors, which are now an Elite's choice, and Duty Eternal, which is now native to every single Dreadnought. In terms of stratagems that we do have, there are Epic Deed stratagems for characters. Only in Death Does Duty End has been nerfed. You can now only fight when you die if you haven't already fought in the fight phase already, so no using this for a second round of close combat after your character's already fought. Armour of Contempt is unchanged, 5+ Feel No Pain for vehicles against mortal wounds. Power of the Machine Spirit costs 2 command points, and it allows a Repulsor, Land Raider or other unit with the Machine Spirit keyword to fight on full profile. Honestly, I don't think that's going to be worth it most of the time for 2 CP. Wisdom of the Ancients has received a buff, it's 1 command point, and it allows a Dreadnought to either function as a captain or a lieutenant, giving an aura of either reroll hit rolls of 1 or reroll wound rolls of 1, and it'll affect all core units, which will include the Dreadnought itself. Very powerful and good to have that flexibility if you were running one alongside a captain. Commanding Oratory is 2 command points to auto-pass a litany in the command phase. Could be good if you're absolutely 100% sure that you need a litany to go off for your strategy, as you can't actually reroll them with command points now. Still though, very pricey at 2 CP. Combat Revival is that apothecary one to revive an infantry or biker unit within 3 inches, and it comes back at 4 wounds remaining, such as for maximum cheese and invader ATV at 8 wounds. I honestly suspect that might get FAQs. There's a couple of requisition stratagems where you can spend 1 command point for a relic or 1 command point for a Warlord Traits, though interestingly these are tied to how big the game is that you're playing. If you're playing a Strike Force game, then you can use these just twice now, and if you're running a game that's less than that, you can only use them once. This could be a bit of an impediment to Space Marine armies who are used to running around with as many relics as they want. Next we have Battle Tactics Stratagems. 1 command point is Death to Traitors, reroll hit rolls in melee versus Heretic Astartes, nice and simple. Honor the Chapter has actually taken a massive nerf, you can now only fight again in the fight phase for Assault Intercessors only. You can't just take your favourite Space Marine fighty combat unit and fight it a second time for 3 CP, that option is gone. I guess it gives the Assault Intercessors something unique, but still that's a big blow to the army. Fury of the First is unchanged, +1 to hit for Terminators in a phase. Transhuman Physiology is actually slightly buffed, it's only 1 command point if you're using it on a unit of 5 or fewer, though it remains at 2 CP for a unit of 5 or more, and that's quite powerful as that's a really commonly used one. Rapid Fire, the stratagem for Intercessors, has been buffed in my opinion. You can now fire twice with an Intercessor squad or Veteran Intercessor squad, but you can't use it on Heavy Intercessors. The big deal for this one is that instead of just standard bolt rifles, it'll work for auto bolt rifles or stalker bolt rifles now, so you're potentially getting an extra 10 Intercessors worth of shooting for just 2 CP. Really very powerful, I'm sure that this will be used quite a bit. Next for 1 command point we have Gene Wrought Might. This one allows Primaris units to auto wound the enemy on the roll of a 6 to hit, a small but meaningful melee buff that you could stack with Assault Intercessors or some other Primaris melee units. Maybe could be good with Blade Guard veterans as well. Next we have a new one that's unyielding in the face of the foe. This one gives you +1 to your save for a Gravis armoured unit if it's targeted by an attack with a damage characteristic of 1. Not bad, but I think that Gravis armour is generally going to be more scared by multi-damage weapons as they just have so many wounds to play with. Next we have the Strategic Play Stratagems, and there are a couple that I missed off the list. First of all we have Hit and Run Warfare for 1 command point, and this one allows Astartes Bikers, Land Speeders or Storm Speeders to shoot in a turn that they fell back. So you're not going to be able to deny the shooting firepower of Invader ATVs or Land Speeders all that easily. There's also Hammer of Wrath for 1 command point, which is for jump packs in the charge phase, and this one's been slightly buffed. You roll 1d6 for every jump pack model that ends its charge move in engagement range, and if that roll equals or exceeds the enemy's toughness, then they take 1 mortal wound. Kind of makes sense really, they'll be a lot more easy to squish low toughness units. Sticking with a fast attack we have Skilled Riders, which has been nerfed I think. It's -1 to hit for a Land Speeder, Bike Squad or Storm Speeder squad that has advanced, so if you haven't advanced then you're not getting the bonus. I think that the invul save was a bit more useful myself. Next we have Uncompromising Fire for 2 CP, which could potentially be useful in the right circumstances. It means a squad can still shoot in the turn that it does an action, which could be quite nice for trying to win the game. Say if you desperately need some Hellblasters to do an action and still mow down the enemy, then they can do that all the same. I think that one will see some play in Eternal War games. Next we have 2 CP for Steady Advance. It allows an infantry squad to count as having remained stationary for the purposes of shooting. Really good for heavy weapons, Bolter Discipline and the Dark Angels chapter tactic, which gives them +1 to hit if they remain stationary. It is still quite a lot of command points to pay for that privilege though, it's only ever going to be worth it on the absolute biggest infantry units. Another pricey but potentially powerful one is 2 command points for Adaptive Strategy. If you have a chapter Warlord on the table, you get to select 1 core unit and it counts as having all 3 of the combat doctrines active for that turn. It could potentially be really useful for getting a unit to be in the Assault Doctrine early. Very powerful for some units such as Blood Angels or White Scars, or maybe going back and using Devastator Doctrine again for extra AP and maybe some other special rules for a big Dreadnought or a heavy weapon toting infantry squad perhaps. Again pricey, but on some of the biggest units I could see it being worth it. Moving on, we have Suppression Fire, which is a whirlwind stratagem. When the whirlwind attacks an enemy unit, it can't either fire Overwatch or set to defend, and it fights last in the fight phase. It could actually be really quite good to have a whirlwind as a utility piece, and it might have the potential to swing a combat if your opponent was thinking about interrupting. 2 command points for Terror Troops for Reavers. It gives them a 3-inch aura of removing objective secured rules from enemy units, and if the enemy unit is performing an action, you roll 2d6, and if it equals or beats their leadership, then that action fails. For me, that's super situational. It might occasionally come into effect, but not very often. Next we have Guerrilla Tactics for 1 command point. This allows a Phobos unit that's greater than 6 inches away from enemy models to go into strategic reserve, potentially very useful as redeploying or maybe getting around the enemy in the latter turns of the game, though it will come at the price of having the unit spend a turn off the table, certainly one to remember if you're using Phobos. Orbital Bombardment has changed quite a lot. It's 3 command points and it happens in the command phase. You select a marker at 1 point on the battlefield, then you have to wait till the next command phase, and every unit within 6 inches suffers d3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 2 to 5, or d6 on the roll of a 6. I think it's good in some ways, but it does mean that the enemy has a turn to get out of range of this orbital bombardment, which is probably going to limit its effect on anything that's really all that powerful. I can't really see it being used all that often, to be honest. Finally, we come to War Gear strats. Auspex scan is still 2 command points, but it happens at the end of the movement phase rather than straight after the enemy is set up, and it no longer has the -1 to hit when you shoot at the enemy. Probably a positive overall. It means that you can choose to decide what enemy unit to shoot at the end of the phase. Tremor Fire for Thunder Cannons still halves movement, and it's now just -2 from advance and charge rolls. There's also no option to double fire the Thunderfire cannons anymore, that one's gone. Shock and Awe is 1 command point for a unit with shock grenades such as Reavers or the Landspeeder Storm, and within 6 inches it prevents Overwatch and set to defend, and it will also make the units -1 to hit in their next turn. Not too bad as a debuff, particularly if you could push on a powerful gunline unit perhaps. Next we have Assault Launchers for 1 command point. You use it on an assault launcher unit such as a Centurion Assault Squad or an Ironclad Dreadnought or Land Raider Crusader, and the enemy has to choose whether they want to take d3 mortal wounds, or the charging debuff of -1 attack, not being able to Overwatch or set to defend if in cover. Honestly, I think this one's a bit rubbish to be honest, because your opponent gets to choose which one of the debuffs they want to take, meaning that it's always going to be the worst one. Next we have Melter Bomb, which is a keyword that a few units have, and is one reason to take the Assault Squad. One of the models makes a single attack in the squad instead of their normal attacks, but if it hits it gets 2d3 mortal wounds versus a vehicle target, potentially a decent return on investment. Next we have Grav Pulse, the one for Impulsors, Repulsors and Gladiator tanks. This one allows you to use the repulsor field to either fall back and shoot, or in the charge phase when your opponent charges you, you can use this reactively and the tank will be -2 to charge for that phase. Both very solid options, in particular the -2 to charge could be great against enemies that are coming out of Deep Strike. It's also nice to know that those powerful tanks can fall back and shoot, which is really quite a good option. Next we have Hellfire Shells for 1 CP. You fire a single shot with a heavy bolter, that's d3 mortal wounds against most targets, or 3 mortal wounds versus a monster. A nice small buff, and it makes it a bit more useful against monsters. Flak Missile has been changed a bit. You can only use it against aircraft now, but if you do hit with it with the missile launcher, then again it's 2d3 mortal wounds rather than just d3, so it's a bit more meaningful. Definitely could be worth it in the right circumstances. And finally we have Smokescreen, which is certain units such as Infiltrators and Incursors, or any of the Primaris vehicles with auto launchers. It's quite a nice reactive shooting defensive buff, and you can basically make these units -1 to hit for 1 command point, much in the same way that Eldar would with lightning fast reactions. I think that could be really good on something like an Incursor squad trying to hold a midfield objective early in the game, making them a real pain to shift for your opponents. So overall for the stratagems, plenty of powerful options, but also quite a lot of powerful options nerfed in this. I think some of my favourites are the Apothecary one for healing units, Transhuman Physiology on small units for 1 command point, Rapid Fire with Intercessors, and Wisdom of the Ancients, though honestly there are quite a lot of regular ones that you'd want to use regularly on units, such as Grav Pulse and Fall Back and Shoot for Landspeeders and Bikes. Moving on, here we have the list of Warlord traits. The majority of them aren't changed, but a few are in various different ways. Fear Made Manifest is a bit worse for leadership debuff. It gives you +1 to combat attrition rolls as well as the -1 leadership that it already did, though I still don't think people are going to take it. Storm of Fire, the one with the extra AP on 6s, now only affects a chapter core unit, but the Rights of War rule has been changed quite a bit. It now gives objectives secured to all core and character units within 6 inches of your character. In 9th edition I can see this one actually being really quite useful, particularly on fast moving characters and units, to steal objectives out from under your opponent's nose. The Vanguard Warlord traits have also been fairly extensively redone. Lord of Deceit is now redeploying 3 Phobos units, and he can also use this to put them into Strategic Reserve for free, which is quite nice. Stealth Adept now gives him old school character protection. You can't target him unless he's the closest unit to you, even with sniper weapons, and largely most of the others are unchanged. Out of the Warlord traits, I still really like the Imperium Sword. +1 strength and attack and rerolling charges is a really good little combo, and I think will still be taken quite a lot. There's a whole ton of chapter-specific Warlord traits, most of which again are unchanged as far as I can tell. Notably though, the Dark Angels 1 has been changed. You can choose any one unit within 6 inches of the Dark Angels Warlord to be in the previous doctrine. It's really helpful for if you're in the tactical doctrine and you want to put one of your Dark Angels units back into Devastator, and you can get the extra range and extra AP on some of their heavy weapons. It's interesting that it can be any Dark Angels unit, it's not just core ones, so you could use this on a really massive tank to get some ongoing Devastator Doctrine goodness. The Space Wolf one is also quite interesting. The character gets +1 attack versus vehicles and monsters, and also +1 to hit and wound against them. There's no mention of any saga benefits, so I guess they might well be doing away with that slightly annoying system that they had from the Codex. The Imperial Fist one, for ignoring AP-1 while receiving the benefit of cover, only applies to core units now, as does the Deathwatch one, for allowing a unit within 6 inches to select one battlefield roll to reroll wound rolls of 1 against, which sounds like they can now have that on top of the reroll wound rolls of 1 against whatever their mission tactic has chosen. In general though, the vast majority of these are exactly the same, so I won't go over all of them in too much detail. The same is largely true of the relics. Pretty much most of them are unchanged, all the same relics are present, none of them have been dropped or added, and they haven't included any of the supplement specific ones such as mastercrafted weapons or anything. A few of the ones that have been tweaked are the Shield Eternal, which now gives a 4+ invul save and +1 to saves as with standard Storm Shields, and also gives them a 5+ Feel No Pain. You can also use this on models with a combat shield, so you could use it on a chapter champion if you wanted. The Armor Indomitus now gives a 2+ save, 1 turn of 3+ invul saves, and +1 to the wound characteristic. The standard of the Emperor Ascendant now gives you a reroll to morale rather than auto-passing, and now this one can actually be relevant compared with the And They Shall Know No Fear rules that would give this in the past. Purgatorus, the Relic Bolt Pistol, is now Pistols 3, 18 inches, Strength 5, AP-3, Damage 2. It isn't really too bad damage dealing, though it's still not overwhelming. The Ghostweave Cloak now allows the user to move through models and be -1 to hit, and that's just on models with a camo cloak. And the Honor Variant only gives the +1 attack to core units and not characters. For me, I think that most of the relics in the Codex supplements tend to be stronger than most of the relics in the core Codex. From the core Codex, probably my favourite relic is the Teeth of Terror, the chainsaw that gives you +1 strength, AP-2, damage 2, and an extra 3 attacks, and also the Chaplain's Benediction of Fury, the relic Crozius that gives him damage 3, and also a mortal wound effect. Next we come to the Litanies of Battle. Again, pretty much all of these aren't changed. They're done in your command phase now, rather than at the start of the battle round. They go off on a 3+, and they all affect only core units or characters. Exaltation of Rage has been changed a bit. That's the other one that buffed melee attacks. You can now get +1 to wound in melee for this, which I think is far stronger than the previous rule. As before, they all get Litany of Hate for the 6-inch aura of reroll to hit in melee, and I think that most of them have their uses. You could use a Master of Sanctity to combine +1 to hit and +1 to wound in the shooting phase. You could use them as a delivery mechanism from reserves for +2 inches to charge. You can use the Mantra of Strength to make chaplains into Smash Chaplains, as they get extra attacks, extra strength and extra damage. And you could combine reroll into hits with a Litany of Hate with +1 to wound on a unit as well, making a pretty decent melee buff. I think that these ones are a little bit harder to coordinate though, seeing as they go off in the command phase, and it does involve the chaplain being next to the melee unit at all times. There aren't any chapter-specific litanies in the book. These will likely be in the supplements, so I guess the ones in Faith and Fury still stand for now. Next we come to Psychic Powers, again largely unchanged, all the same names, and all the same options from the Librarius and Obscuration disciplines. The Librarius discipline will be a new option for Blood Angels, Space Wolves and Dark Angels, so it does add a few more options to their codexes. A few of the notable changes are that Might of Heroes are now only core or character units, but it's still very good for Dreadnoughts. Getting a Redemptor to be Toughness 8 could be pretty useful. Fury of the Ancients is now only Warp Charge 6 and an 18-inch range, though it's still not all that good. But probably the best and most improved one of these is Psychic Fortress, which is now only Warp Charge 6, and it gives you a 6-inch aura of 5+ invul saves to all chapter units, not just core and not just characters or things. Auras like this are just incredibly strong. particularly when they have the opportunity to cover multiple things that wouldn't normally get an invul save. Anything with a 3+ save is really going to like this. It's going to protect them against the highest AP enemy weapons. I could see this being very useful on things like Redemptor Dreadnoughts, or maybe even really big guns such as Repulsor Executioners, or maybe those new Gladiator tanks. It could be pretty handy just on an advancing infantry battle line though, maybe if you have a whole load of intercessors rushing forward. I'd argue that this Psychic Fortress is now the new strongest spell in the discipline. My other favourites being Null Zone to counter some invul saves, and Might of Heroes to soup up a character or put some toughness on a Dreadnought. For the Phobos Librarian, the Obscuration discipline has seen a few changes too. Hallucination is now simply -1 to hit and -1 to leadership. You don't have to do the annoying thing where you dice off against their leadership characteristic, and honestly it's really quite a decent debuff. Tenebrous Curse is now Warp Charge 7 and it was 6 previously, and it gives you 1 mortal wound on the enemy unit, you halve their movement, and they're -2 to advance and charge. Much like the Thunderfire Cannon's Tremor Shells, it should hopefully stop an enemy unit from getting to melee. Finally, Temporal Corridor is now only Warp Charge 5, and you have to use it on a Phobos unit within 6 inches. It can't shoot or fight in the same turn, though it doesn't say anything about charging, so I guess I'll have to FAQ that. But essentially the Phobos unit gets to move again, and it can also choose to advance, and if it does advance then it moves an extra 6 inches. Potentially could be a handy one for catapulting a Phobos unit onto contesting a midfield objective. Last but not least, Codex Space Marines has 3 unique secondary objectives that it can pick now, and you can only use these if every model in your army is Adeptus Astartes or Agents of the Imperium or unaligned, and your Warlord is an Adeptus Astartes character. There's 3 options. First one is Codex Warfare, which I think is a little bit weak. It's Oppose the Enemy one, and you can basically earn up to 5 victory points for enemy units destroyed when the army is in each combat doctrine. If you wanted to max it, you'd have to kill 5 units in the Devastator doctrine in turn 1, then another 5 in Tactical doctrine, and another 5 in Assault doctrine. I'd say you're pretty much guaranteed to get at least some kills out of that, but it's very hard to max. Next up we have Battlefield Supremacy, which is Shock Tactics. You get 3 command points at the end of the battle round if you control an objective controlled by your opponent at the start of the turn. Again, I'd say that this one's hard to max, particularly as it scores at the end of the battle round, giving a big advantage to players going second. If you go first, you might take an objective away from the enemy, but then in their turn they might just take it straight back and you won't score this secondary. Personally, I don't think that this one's very worth it. Finally, there is one that is quite good I think, a No Mercy No Respite one called Oaths of Moments. This one seems to be a bunch of small secondaries clustered into one, and you get victory points depending on whether you've achieved any of these at the end of the battle round. You get 1 victory point per battle round if you've killed at least 1 character, monster or vehicle, 1 if you've not failed any morale tests and none of your units fell back, and 2 victory points if you've got an Adeptus Astartes unit entirely within 6 inches of the centre of the table. In general, this is the main one that you're going to have to push for. It basically means the centre of the table is one that you'll have to push for, basically like an objective, and you should score a fair amount of incidental points from the other 2 bits of it as you go along. This one seems very strong, and definitely could be a worthwhile pickup for Space Marine armies, I think. So there we have it, a full review of Codex Space Marines in all its glory. Some really big changes both on the positive and negative front for Codex Space Marines. In terms of takeaways, I think that the chapter tactics rebalancing has been good. More options than ever seem very viable now, but I'm not sure that anything's going to necessarily unseat Salamanders from the top spot until their codex is changed. Losing And They Shall Know No Fear and the option to fight again in the fight phase is really quite a big blow, as is the change to Chapter Master rerolls, which is certainly weaker than previously. However, some units do seem to have got really good buffs out of the change. In particular, Terminators going to 3 wounds I think are going to be very strong and playable. Dreadnoughts with baked-in Duty Eternal are going to be everywhere, and I think that Apothecaries will make appearances in far more lists. Eradicators and Heavy Intercessors look like some of the new cheese from Codex Space Marines, and I'm sure we'll see quite a few more melter weapons in general from all the changes to their rules. For the most part, I think that stratagems have been reined in a bit rather than getting more powerful, and there's only been minor tweaks to the Warlord Traits, Relics and Psychic powers. I think that the Psychic Shield Psychic power is actually probably the biggest change to any of those, and that could make appearances in quite a few lists, I think. So I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are on the new and improved Codex Space Marines. I think it's safe to say that Marines are still going to be very strong, but I'm not necessarily certain that this is actually going to be a massive power buff to Marines. They do seem to have lost quite a few options, as well as gaining them. Probably for the best on the whole. Hopefully some balance will start to emerge as the other factions start to get their 9th edition codexes. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more videos like this. And if you have found this video useful, then I'd just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description below. This video has been an absolutely monumental effort, taken well over 10 hours worth of work, so if you have got any good value out of it, then any support is massively appreciated. Feel free to check out the Patreon link in the video description. Channel patrons get certain rewards for supporting, such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what happens next on the channel, and also entry into the channel's monthly prize draws. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.